Eu vou apresentar já já a Marina, é uma honra ter a Marina com a gente, Marina Gorbis, do Institute for the Future. O Institute for the Future é o mais antigo instituto de futurismo do mundo. Eles trabalham há 5 décadas, trazendo insights maravilhosos para a gente. E a Marina, ela é presidente do Institute for the Future. Nós vamos falar sobre o cenário pós-Covid. Marina, thank you so much for joining us and to talk about these very chaotic times we are living now. And I have introduced you already for people that are watching us, but maybe you can talk a little bit about the Institute for the Future, or what you do, and the wonderful things you have creating along the years. And so please, thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, and thanks for having me. The Institute for the Future is a nonprofit research organization based in the Bay Area, in the middle of Silicon Valley in Palo Alto. We've actually been around for quite some time, for 52 years. So originally it was a spin-off from RAND, a large research organization, so formed in 1968. This was also a time of great uncertainty, a lot of social turmoil, wars, a lot of technology change. And the mission of the Institute is to help people systematically think about the future, not because we think that anybody can predict the future, but because we think it's essential for people to understand the future trends, the future context, to help them make better decisions today. So, and sometimes we say that our mission is to combat short-termism. We think short-termism is something that's kind of embedded as a kind of an illness disease in our society, and it has a lot of deleterious bad consequences. And so our mission is to help people think about the future to hopefully make better decisions today.
Yes, then create the better future, a better situation.
Hopefully.
Yes, wonderful.
Hopefully better futures.
And we needed this now, just now. So we are experiencing a global event now that for most people would be unthinkable. Actually, I think it is first time for most of us to have a situation like this, the COVID-19, and the consequences it has. So that goes beyond damages in health, in individual health, impacting behaviors like lockdowns, social distance, new rules, social health, economy, etc. However, this kind of event and its possible scenarios have been thought of before in advance. People don't think about that and don't prepare for that. So Marina, why we usually don't pay attention on things like that that are devastating? So.
Yeah, this is a question that a lot of us in the futures field have been asking ourselves, because a lot of people, you couldn't predict the timing of this particular event, but if you talk to epidemiologists, if you talk to futurists, a lot of people saw it coming because, we talked about this danger of zoonotic diseases as a population grows. We're encountering animals more. We're encroaching into wildlife territories. We're interacting more with animals. Then you look at travel. We're connected more, so it's harder to contain these epidemics to one place. So you can kind of put those things together, and you can see how the potential of an event like this happening definitely was on the horizon for many people. So then the question becomes, why don't we pay attention to this? Or, we listen to it, we understand, we get scared maybe, but we don't act on it. And I think the reason is that all the incentives that we have in a lot of our systems is to do things on a short-term basis. So you think about companies, they're rewarded for short-term things like their share price. So it makes no sense for them to increase their output or create surplus, because it's all about productivity, efficiency. In fact, when you fire workers or if you reduce costs, your share price goes up. So there are no incentives. You think about politics, it's all about my next election, next thing that's on the political horizon. So there are very few incentives in the system to think and prepare for the long term. And that, I think, is like the biggest, existential threat, is that we need to build some incentives into all the systems in which we operate to not just think about the future, but to act on it.
Yeah, this is really interesting, because I think we do the same thing in our daily lives. We usually do things that are more urgent, but sometimes we delay or don't do things that are much more important. And I think it's the same correlation, but in different levels and a big level.
Yeah, and I think on the personal level, my colleague Jane McGonigal talks about it. She studies like what happens in the brain, with the brain when you think about long term. And it turns out that when we ask somebody to imagine what they will be like in 10 years or 8 years, it turns out that the same part of your brain lights up as when you encounter a stranger. So thinking about ourselves.
IFTF has been working on forecasting for several decades now, being one of the most important institutes of the world for thinking and creating the future. Creating the future is very important. I know you are constantly developing researches to highlight future scenarios, like the future of education, future of work, etc. And now you are working specifically on the future considering the actual crisis. So could you please explain the react, reset, and rebuild process, sharing with us which scenarios are likely to develop from that?
Yeah. So reset, rebuild, reinvent is the process we're kind of using react. We're right now in the react mode right now with this crisis, right? So these crises, usually they have a patterns over time, right? At first, we're all shocked, we're reacting, we're dealing with the crisis and trying to rebuild any way we can. And then there's a period after this immediate reaction where we're trying to make sense of it. We're trying to reassess, what is it about? What did we learn? What is the signals we're seeing? But ultimately, it also gives us an opportunity to reassess and rebuild, reimagine. What is it? Where do we want to go from here? And this is where what we're using in terms of building these scenarios, we're looking at where are we now, what do we know about it, and where can we go from? Okay. And usually they use kind of vulnerabilities in the immune system to penetrate and to propagate. So we're looking at what kind of vulnerabilities do we have in our social system, in our technologies, in our health systems, and what do we need to fix so it doesn't happen again, so that we rebuild our immunity. So in these scenarios, we take this approach of like looking at 3 time horizons. What is the actions or choices we're going to make right now? What can we do in the next 6 months to 2 years? And ultimately, this crisis gives us an opportunity to rethink and reimagine the kind of future we want to live in. So that's what we're trying to do as we build these scenarios for the future.
And this is a good thing, yes. Although we are facing a terrible crisis and that it's not good, the fact of we are facing this challenge and rethinking a lot of wrong things, maybe this is an opportunity to create better futures.
I hope so.
Yes, and in this way, in a recent interview about the crisis we are facing now, you stated that hopefully life will never get back to normal. Mm-hmm. So what is the new normal, and why is it good? What it could be so to be good?
Yeah, I think what I meant to say is, like, of course, we want life to get back to some semblance of normalcy, but what we considered as a norm, let's not go back to that, because there were a lot of things and they're being revealed during this crisis that were not good. You know, we have huge income and wealth inequalities, we have racial inequalities, and as we're seeing today, the people who are suffering most are people who are on the front lines, you know, people who don't have incomes, people who are low wage, low income, and they're affected most by it. They're mostly Black and brown people. So this crisis is not affecting everybody equally, and it's feeding on these vulnerabilities, right? It's feeding on that. So we already had these inequalities in the system, and they were kind of hidden, but the crisis has revealed them all. The nature of precarious work, the fact that here in the US, a lot of people don't have access to healthcare. They don't have basic benefits. They don't have enough savings to carry them through a period of unemployment or reduced work. So all of these things that were kind of hidden are now coming out. And so we don't want to go back to the system that kind of created these kind of vulnerabilities. We want to know that, we want to understand it, and then build something better.
Yes, and also I have been talking to people who are locked down here in Brazil too, and the situation among families. There were people who didn't know their kids. Actually, they didn't understand how to live together and what were the challenge. And so I think a lot of things are going to are being revealed, not are going to be, but they are being revealed to all of us, and we are rethinking life. The
Yes.
choices and what it was like an automatic thing, it's not anymore. So this is like a wake-up call. Some people are saying that coronavirus has accelerated the digital transformation. I work with that a lot, but I think it accelerated some part of this, and the other parts we are very vulnerable and we don't have structure. So what do you think about that? Because we are accelerating futures, but not all of them, and we have some gaps also.
I think there's a lot of kind of rethinking, as you were saying about families. Families are getting to know each other. I hear a lot from people. We did several panels of what's called frontline workers, including nurses and doctors and people who are doing delivery and all of that. And you hear a lot how people are rethinking about what's essential, including what is essential work, right? And all of a sudden, people who are doing delivery, who are nurses, who are caretakers, we think of them, people who are growing food. It turns out that that's kind of essential work. And obviously, these people are not paid essential wages a lot of times. But it's the same in our families where, and again, you hear it a lot. It's like, okay, what is essential to me right now? Because we're not really buying, or we're not able to go out and do all these things, kind of little luxuries that we had before. So we're doing essential things. We're cooking, we're cleaning, all of us, we're teaching our kids, the ones who have kids at home. All of a sudden you have to be a teacher, you have to be a cook, you have to be a cleaner, you have to do all these things. And people are kind of recalibrating what is it that's essential to them, what really matters. And in the end, what does matter, it's your community, your family, your kids, being able to provide food, all of these things. We're kind of in this moment where all of a sudden we are in this essentials economy in some ways.
And this is really interesting because I know you have developed in Institute for the Future a huge work talking about communities as the solution for the future, and the inequality is a terrible thing we're facing because of technology and also other factors in the world. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about what are you doing on community area, and why is it so important in the future we have communities and we engage on that.
There is Dan Buettner, who is a journalist. He wrote this book about blue zones. Blue zones are those areas where people live longer, and it's parts of Greece, islands, and it's in Japan and in different areas. And then when you look at those places, they have certain things in common. And it's not that people there have a lot of money, but they have a strong sense of community. They have a strong sense of belonging. They have a purpose within their communities. They do, they eat healthy, not necessarily going out so much, but they just eat healthier diets. They walk, they exercise, as not because they go to gyms or expensive spas, but because it's part of their lives. So when you look at that and you realize that, what really makes for a good life and for a healthy life is really those things that are all related to your social well-being and being part of the community, having a purpose, having relationships, having strong social ties, eating well and all these other things, and belonging. And, here in the US, I don't know about Brazil, but we have the crisis of loneliness. We have a lot of people who don't have social contact, who are isolated, and it's hitting them particularly hard during these times, right? Because social isolation has the same detrimental health effects as like smoking.
Yes, you are completely right. In the beginning of the year, in my vacation, I visit Okinawa, and it was really interesting because they have a very simple life. There is one of the blue zones in the world, and it's exactly what you said. They value the small things in life, and they value the joy, etc. Here in Brazil, I think we have a situation similar to United States. A lot of people together, but sometimes alone, and we don't exercise properly, and then we don't do the right things, and then we have to make artificial ways to do the things we should do at the first place. So
Right. And I think the hard thing for people now is that for many people, their workplaces have been their main places of social connection. And so now that they don't have that, it's also very hard on people.
Yes, this is one of the things we have been noticing, and I'm a researcher also, so we have been talking about, because we went from almost all places 100% analog to 100% digital, and life probably is a mix of that. What we like and the good experience is a mix, not just 100% isolation and all digital. So I think we are moving for a hybrid way of living or something like that. And there is one thing more that you talk a lot about there in the Institute of the Future that I'd like to address here. I am an educator, and I am a fierce evangelist for critical thinking. And we know there are several researchers about that. The critical thing is diminishing, like IQ and other things. And this is really, really a problem because we have a challenge world with uncertainty even before the coronavirus. So what you recommend, and you talk about that as cognitive, that we need to develop, you have a paper on that, cognitive immunity. We have to develop that. So maybe you can give us some advices and how can people develop and increase the cognitive immunity?
Yeah, the whole concept of cognitive immunity came as a result of what we were looking at, which is this kind of computational propaganda. So, there's so many information platforms, and there are bots and other things, and anybody can put out information. So how do you know whether it's true or not? And there are a lot of these contentious narratives around everything, right? And it's coming from many, many different places, and it's another kind of vulnerability, right? So we started asking ourselves, like, this concept of cognitive immunity. Again, there's all this propaganda, there's bots, there's disinformation. So how do you a lot of people are looking at technology solutions, like maybe censoring this or prohibiting this or tagging information that's incorrect or false and other things. And ultimately we said, yeah, technology is great, but every time you develop technology to protect against something, it's being used against you at the same time. So it's like this never-ending war. And ultimately you have to kind of take a holistic approach where you need to build a whole systems approach to cognitive immunity. Part of it is how we educate people to understand what is right, how to analyze information, understand where it's coming from. But that's not enough, because you can, again, use that knowledge to build more sophisticated tools for deception. So part of it is also understanding your own cognitive biases. We all have these biases, like, I trust somebody who I know more than I trust a stranger. I trust information that's in certain format more than in other formats. I tend to go to simple narratives and other kinds of things. So actually educating people about their own cognitive biases that are all inherent in how we think. And they had a kind of an evolutionary purpose to them. But now they may be not serving us as well. But it's also creating, public platforms where people can review information. It's, creating things that are not necessarily just private media, but public platforms that are more vetted, more curated. It's creating certain kind of curation things. But to your question about critical thinking, I think like we've been so much of the education, at least here in the US, and I probably more so in the US than other places, have become all about training for certain skills so that people can find jobs, right? And we're seeing the result of that in that, we need people to be solid citizens to understand information. We need people who understand media. We need people who are like deeply educated. And it's not just about skills, it's not about coding. Although, if you're interested in coding, great, but also learn philosophy, understand how people were thinking before this. And that's, experiences is a great way of learning things, living in places where people speak different languages or being in different cultures. That's great contribution to your critical thinking. So it's a much deeper kind of education that we need, and probably slower in some ways. It's not about like, you test this and you're done and you move on to the next thing. It's like continuously thinking and reading and talking to people from different perspectives. It's a very, very different approach.
Yes, sometimes I say that the first person you have to not trust is yourself, and then you have to have different people with different background. And I think the community connects here also, because if you have different people with you all the time, you are always challenging your way of thinking, and this is a good way. And the other thing is our schools here in Brazil, and I think most of the places in the world, we have only grammar. We don't have the logic and rhetoric and other forms that make you think. So I think this is a very important topic, and only education can give us that. I agree completely, and let's keep talking about that. So maybe people go on.
Maybe this is another moment where we will rethink some of this.
Yes, yes. I think schools are trying to, but it requires a lot of changing in the way things are. So critical thinking is one of the most important abilities for the future. So you have to have this anyhow. The other thing is technology have been empowering people from the beginning of the times, humanity. And in your book, The Nature of the Future, you highlight the amplified individuals and how platforms provide that, the amplification. So could you talk a little bit about the importance of amplifying individuals and what is like to be amplified individual in a community, in a place, or something like that?
I think that what that was referencing is that we have all these platforms that enable us to come together to do all kinds of things. And we can use these resources to do the kind of things that previously nobody could do as an individual or an organization. And I think like Wikipedia is probably the oldest and best example of that, where, you have a platform where people can contribute and thousands of people can contribute. They have editors and others, and a lot of people can sort of read it and curate it, but it allows people, all of a sudden you're able to create the kind of resource that you could not imagine before, in so many languages and hundreds of languages, millions of people reading from this platform. And if you compare it to like Encyclopedia Britannica or others, like, it's just unimaginable. And it's an amazing resource. And we're seeing all across the board people coming together to do these kinds of things. Like during this crisis, there's been several online communities to basically help support people during this time, make masks, do research and other kinds of things. So this technology enables us to basically come together and amplified with connections with other, do the kind of things that probably no organization it's unimaginable what we could do in terms of research, in terms of collaboration, across the board.
Oh, wonderful. We have some questions from the audience, but first we are finishing some topics I think are very important to discuss, and then I start with the questions I'm receiving already. And the other thing is, I think we have talked a little bit about communities, and you have the work on equitable futures. And also now, everybody in every country starts to talking again about the universal basic income, which is connected to that. So why in the future is it important? What do you think about universal basic income, and if it should be more quickly implemented or not? And your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The universal basic income is an idea that's been around for a long time, and it's always was thought about as like, oh, this is like fringe left. Well, actually, both sides, but kind of a fringe idea, and now it's becoming really mainstream. I don't think we can get out of this crisis without some form of basic income. We're already doing it with stimulus and others, unemployment. We're doing it under different guises, but I just don't see, given the fact that so many people do not have jobs and can't work right now, at least for the immediate period, it seems like some form of income support is absolutely necessary, whether it's universal basic income or in the form of unemployment or other kinds of things. I do think it's a good thing. I also believe that long-term universal basic income is not enough, because if you look at kind of the wealth disparities, most of these disparities are not based on income, it's based on your wealth. It's on your assets that you own. So ultimately, we need to be thinking about what I call universal basic assets. So what are the core set of resources that every individual is entitled to, that allows them, and it doesn't have to be money, and it's other kinds of things. It's access to clean air, it's access to water, it's access to community, it's access to health, education, and other kinds of things. But it's also actual wealth. A lot of inequality, like income inequality, is great in the US, but wealth inequality is much, much higher. And so we need to be thinking beyond universal basic income to something that gives people more access to actual wealth.
Yeah, no, and also when we talk about artificial intelligence now, it's a urgent issue that people from all backgrounds and all kind of I don't know how to say that, but not only different backgrounds, but different way of thinking and how they live, they participate on that. But it's very hard. Sometimes I am in the United States discussing that in conferences, but you cannot have people from Africa, for example. It's not accessible for them. Or if you need that visa to arrive a country to discuss that, you cannot go. It's the same here in Brazil. So I think this is a very pressing question, and we have beyond the coronavirus or situation we are having now. So the other thing is one of the topics we were talking a lot before coronavirus, and now it gets much more urgent, is the resilience of a company. And you have been also in Institute of the Future talking about new models and to develop more resilient models to face the uncertainties of the future. So how can a company transform to be more resilient for the emergent context?
Well, I think companies, there's kind of rules of resilient systems that actually, a lot of them come from biology and our natural systems. Nature is very resilient and tends to rebuild itself. So I think we can learn a lot from that. And there are several things that we know, which is you have a lot of redundancies in the system, right? So if something fails, there's something else that plugs in and comes in. And immune system is one part of the resilience, is that you have kind of the balance, right, all the time. But I think what we're seeing, and like we've had these shortages of masks and ventilators and other things. Well, the reason for that is because our supply chains are so efficient, right, that there's no slack, there is no resiliencies in that, and that makes system very brittle, because if any chain is broken, any one of those, it undermines the whole system. So we created these great global supply systems, but they're so brittle because along the way you have this one chain that's missing and the whole thing is broken. So creating this kind of redundancy, there's a lot of monitoring of the systems and overseeing to spot. And to me, that kind of relates to futures thinking, right? A lot of future thinking is looking at signals. So understanding that creating these feedback loops, that something is out of whack here, we need to think, we need to fix it, or we need to be spotting this. So there are a lot of things that I think we can learn from nature around resiliencies that probably are good for companies.
Yeah, one thing is critical paths, and understand we were doing this in the company level, but I think now it's much more challenging because it's global. And the other thing is we were in a trend of connecting everything, and now I am reading that some countries or some areas, they are bubbling, they are closing between themselves. And the other thing is what we had a huge trend to go to cities and urban cities, sorry, places to be much bigger. But now the trend is the opposite. As everybody works online, you can go far away, and so we are seeing a lot of changes on that. And one thing you have said in one of the interviews, I'd like you to talk a little bit more also, is that we are going to have a new normal with a much more attention on public health. And this is really interesting, a good thing, because of several countries like Brazil and the United States, we have a problem on that. So can you a little bit share with us your ideas about this, how it's going to be the new normal, including the public health and the awareness for that.
I think this crisis kind of shines a spotlight on frailties in our public health and underinvestment in our public health. And in many ways, we've always conceived of health as your individual, as a private good, right? You work on yourself and you're healthy and you have this kind of genetic makeup and all of that. But, what this crisis is revealing is that you're only as healthy as a homeless person next to you, that we're actually all connected, that health is a public good. Health is a public something that's we can't isolate. It's very difficult, the cost of isolating, if it's at all possible. Even if you're sitting at home and you're completely isolated, unless you're growing your own food and your own clothes and all of that, you're still connected to others. So to me, it just makes sense that we should think of health as a public good, and we need to invest in that public health infrastructure.
Maybe health and education, as you mentioned before. And also, there are some studies and some kind of learning from the past that the behaviors we are developing now are going to stay. Several of them are going to be residual as low touch economy, and it changes a lot of things. So, what do you think that are the most residual behavior we are going to have after the lockdown?
Well, depending on how long it lasts, and it looks like it's going to last for a long time. Uh, who knows how long, but 6 months, 2 years, who knows, depending on whether it's going to come in waves and all of that. But clearly, and what's somewhat disturbing, is that we're seeing and starting to perceive other people as disease vectors, right? So when you go outside, you sort of like, you look at people as like, you start seeing them, as potentially they will contaminate you. And I think that's kind of disturbing in many ways, because I think we're going to have to wear masks for a while. We'll have to protect our workplaces when we go back in. So we're kind of starting seeing each other. On the one hand, people are friendly and they're saying hello because people are starved for social contact. But on the other hand, like whoever comes into your house or into your workplace, we're going to start like that screen around, is this person germ free? Do they have all of that? And sometimes it's going to be made kind of a requirement, right? That you've passed, like people are talking about this immunity IDs or being tested and all of that. It's almost like you'll have a badge that certifies you that you're germ free,
You are clean.
parasite free.
We are seeing this with the pets also. Unfortunately,
Really?
a lot of people have tossed away their pets because they are like a vector for contamination,
Wow.
and this is this is sad actually.
I think it's the opposite in the US. The animal shelters are empty because people have taken, and companions, they're taking lots of pets.
They are wonderful company. I have mine, and I say, oh my God, it helps me a lot with my mental
Yeah.
health. I think it is really, really, so a lot of change. I'm going to ask you a question from Patricia Ferreira, and women violence has increased during quarantine around the world. And this is the type of vulnerability that we need support to overcome together. How technology can help that on supporting women in violence on their house, domestic violence?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's a technology issue. I mean, certainly being able to reach out to somebody and be connected and all of that is important. But I'm not sure that that's a technology issue. I'm concerned about it too, because yes, we're seeing a lot more violence in the home. I think we're going to have a mental health crisis as a result of this, because so many people, just in general, people are stressed. We're operating in a crisis mode. So we have a lot of those kind of, and, traditionally women being outside of home and having both their means of support and working outside in their community always. So unfortunately, I don't think that there's necessarily, you can put bracelets with all kinds of alerts and other kinds of things. On the other hand, again, these bracelets and these technology things that can also be used to monitor somebody and know where women are going. So I think that, to me, it's not a technology issue, it's a social issue. But definitely offering women hotlines and means of kind of reporting this is important, but also getting people out of the home is important and giving them spaces to go.
Yes, but I think like you, today I have seen Facebook had an initiative, a chatbot that could help women. Now they increase the amount of information over there. But if we think the families weren't designed to be like this as we are now, so the stress is really higher, and we have the challenge of living this way and help each other in this way. So I think it's not a easy issue, but we have to pass through that also. Um, what is your advice? We are going to the end, and what is your advice for us to prepare ourselves as human to this new normal? As you said, now we are stressed, and we are going to face a lot of economic crisis and other kind of things. So, what can we do to arrive there or better prepared?
Individually, well, I mean, as a society, get involved. I think this is a moment where a lot of people need to get involved in thinking and imagining different possibilities. I think it's, you don't want to be living in a future that was brought to you by somebody else. So to the degree that people can organize even online, in your community, in your families, start conversations about what kind of future do we want to live in? What have we learning from this crisis? Engage more in these kind of deep conversations. There is a moment of kind of pause on many levels. And we just actually published an op-ed, I think on Medium, if you go to IFTF Medium page, with kind of like guide to how to think about this moment. And one of the things we're talking about is that this is a moment for a lot of people to be coming together, having conversations. Have conversations with people around what are they seeing around them, what are they observing, what are they changing their minds about, what is this situation revealing to them. And I think that is both creates communities, but also engage people, engage kids, engage families in conversations around what is the future that you want to build. And then from there, it's like, okay, what can we do to get there? There are some things that you can control, and there are some things that you cannot control. But I think the more you can create communities, the more power you have to design, to create the kind of future you want to be living in.
I think it connects what you said before, stress, communities, and trying to create the future we want and the things we had granted for. And also, I think this moment is like a wake-up call for all of us. And maybe we are really rethinking, like you said in first place, reacting now and resetting what is not working and then rebuild. And as governments, institutions, and companies, we have seen beautiful initiatives, but also we have seen awful initiatives. I have some friends that were already fired, and 1 month of quarantine and 1 month of crisis, it was enough to kick people off. So what do you think that companies and governments can do to help the situation?
Well, I mean, clearly there in this crisis moment is basically giving people resources to just survive this moment is absolutely essential, right? And the more you can minimize the pain, the damage, the better off you are. Longer term, I do think it's a moment for politicians, but I don't want to leave the future to politicians. I think that's important, but or to necessarily business executives. What we talk about is how do you make this future massively public so people have a sense that they're part of this future. This is the future they want to be living in. And to the degree that governments and others can engage the public in this conversation about the future and what it should be and how we get there, I think it's really important. Take it out of closed rooms and let's have broader public engaged in this conversation. And I think it's for everybody to do that.
I think the critical thing is very important here, because if you have more educated people, we can much more efficiently do this. And I think we have to educate ourselves. We have how to do this now with the internet and other things. So let me see if we have any other really pressing questions. And I'm going to say something in Portuguese for people here, and then I close with you. Pessoal, eu vou... Actually, Marina, I'm going to say in English first, because I'm going to share with everyone later on the link for this video with the subtitles in Portuguese, and also a link for Institute for the Future with the studies you have there, with several things that are public and people can access and understand and study. And, pessoal, eu vou encerrar e eu vou deixar depois os links para todas as coisas que a gente está falando aqui. O site do Institute for the Future é sensacional, eles têm um monte de infográficos e mapas lá que são bastante bacanas. There is one more question. I think people are really jumping in. And this is the last question, and then we close with the few comments. And do you think that companies like Uber and Cabify will have reduced the adoption due to the health security after the quarantine has passed? And could the adoption of robots in the kitchen for self-service restaurants become a trend? Gartner has predicted that more than 29,000 drone delivery projects this year. Can this reality become the new normal? Actually, I can answer a little bit of this also, because this is the reality that was already being happening. So, Marina, it's with you.
Yeah, I do think that we're thinking that the way to get out of this immediate crisis is to basically through automation and, to the degree that we can automate certain processes and remove people from the chain or the web of production in whatever way obviously telemedicine is growing. And so in this moment, so I do think that we're going to deploy more of these systems to get out of this crisis. I also think there are certain things that robots will never be able to do, like care, last mile kind of things, and that we need to do it carefully so that we don't dehumanize our systems even more. So I'm all for technology. I'm excited about some of these technologies, but I also believe that there's definitely, like, after all, what are we doing it for? We're not doing it for other robots to live well, right? We're doing it for humans. So we need to keep human in the center, in the middle.
Exactly, I agree 100% with you. And one thing I think people sometimes don't think about is that robots and artificial intelligence, they replace activities, not jobs, completely jobs. So when they replace, it's good because they are doing something that they are better than us on that, and we can be better humans. We can be better than what we are. So wonderful. And the last question, can virtual reality be the solution for mental health and events? And
Yeah, and we have Emerging Media Lab at the Institute where we're experimenting with it a
wonderful.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm excited about it. It's not fully there yet, but definitely there are some really exciting possibilities for even creative work, and collaborative work. And what I'm excited about is like social VR, where people can collaborate together in virtual reality. It's just not as accessible yet to the public, but I think that this might be the moment where we're going to see a lot more deployment, and that's exciting.
I remember 2006, more or less, the Second Life. We had this kind of environment, but it was not there yet. People are not prepared for that, but it was very exciting because you
Yeah.
can do much more and connect people much more. So,
Yeah.
Marina, the last closing remarks, like, can you recommend a book, a movie, and a quote for inspiring us in this moment?
A book. Oh my gosh, there's so many books. I'm just kind of focusing on what I'm reading now. I'm reading history of pandemics, um, and I, I'm a. It's interesting because as a futurist, I feel like I'm as much a historian as anything because we're looking at patterns. So any history book I think would be great. Like I'm reading. Saving Capitalism, which is a book that was written about FDR and the National Reconstruction Agency. So, reading books about pandemics and history of pandemics, I highly recommend those. If you're interested in futures thinking, we have an open Coursera course that's online, that's free. You can there's and all of us. Jane McGonigal is an instructor for that, but most people at the Institute have contributed to that, so I highly recommend it. There are lots of different exercises that you can do with your families and with your friends there. Yeah.
I'm going to put the URL later on in the video so people can check the Coursera. So thank you so much. If you wanted to leave us a last message for all of us, and then I thank you after that.
My message is a message I used in my book, and I use it on my business cards. We're all immigrants to the future. None of us are native in that land. And the reason I love it is because I came here as an immigrant, as a refugee myself. And as a refugee, as an immigrant, you have to be adaptable. You have to learn a new language. You don't take things for granted. You have to just see the wonder in new places. And I think it's a good approach to when we think about the future.
Wonderful. Marina, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure and honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for the insights, and let's create the future together. Yes, a better future for we all. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful to talk to you.
E pessoal, muito obrigada a todo mundo que está. Obrigada por terem acompanhado esse papo super bacana com a Marina. Obrigada, pessoal do MLabs que está ajudando a gente aqui também, que fez o apoio. Obrigada a todo mundo e hashtag Tamo Junto. A gente manda uma mensagem com o link. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good night for everyone. Thank you. Bye.